What really worries me today is what's going to happen to us if machines can think. And what interests me specifically is, can they?
Well, that's a very hard question to answer. If you'd asked me that question just a few years ago, I'd have said it was very far-fetched. And today, I just have to admit I don't really know.
Well, if you're confused, Doctor, how do you think I feel?
This is AI for the Rest of Us, a podcast from the University of Texas at Austin.
I'm Mark Earhart.
And I'm Casey Boyle.
This is a show that helps explain artificial intelligence, what it means, who it affects, and what you need to know right now.
I'm convinced that machines can and will think in our lifetime.
There is going to be all this automation. People are going to be out of work.
Computers are taking over now.
Here I am playing chess with a computer.
And then I just flick a switch on the modem and replace the receiver. I'm now waiting for the computer to answer me.
Today on AI for the Rest of Us.
Before it was disclosed to patients that they were speaking with a robot, they were reporting a fairly positive healthcare experience. But once it was disclosed to them, all of that went away.
Hi, Casey.
Hey, Mark.
Today we're talking about AI in healthcare. There are a lot of wild claims out there about AI and what it can do to help make us healthier. So how can we figure out what's real and what's hype? And are there some potential pitfalls with these new technologies?
Today we have Scott Graham, Associate Professor of Rhetoric and Writing and author of the recent book, The Doctor and the Algorithm, Promise, Peril, and the Future of Health AI. Welcome, Scott.
It's great to be here.
So, Scott, you're a professor of rhetoric. Not a lot of people know exactly what that is. So I'm kind of curious if you can just give us like what rhetoric is and then also how AI and healthcare come into your work.
Historically and traditionally, rhetoric is the sort of humanistic study of persuasion. So how is it that one can argue effectively, can convince people of their position, can convene productive debates? And over the last 2,500 years or so, rhetoric has expanded its purview pretty significantly. So it turns out almost any domain of human experience where we're talking, we're debating or arguing or persuading in some way. And so my particular sub-area of rhetoric is rhetoric of science and medicine. It turns out doctors and scientists are arguing and attempting to persuade each other all the time.
What?
I know, right? Crazy. But a scientific conference presentation or a scientific journal article, we think of it as just the facts usually, and there are facts in it to be sure, but it's also an act of persuasion where the authors attempt to persuade the members of their disciplinary community that you should agree with my finding. And so recently, as AI has become huge in health and medicine, I've been really looking at it because there's so much rhetoric of AI in health and medicine. It will change medicine. It will transform healthcare. It will make your doctors better, faster, smarter, more empathetic. All of these things are said to follow from the adoption of AI in medicine. And as you can see, that's a very powerful attempt at persuasion. And so that's where rhetoric comes in.
Wow, fascinating.
One of the things you research is how tech companies and AI researchers make claims and promises about what AI can do in healthcare. How do those claims match up with the reality?
It would be naive right now to imagine that a lot of the claims about AI, especially in health and medicine, are accurate, right? So over the last 5 or 6 years, we have had a massive increase in venture capital investments in health AI. It's now one of the largest or perhaps the largest venture capital investment space. And we know that when folks invest in venture capital projects, that's early on, right? And it's the goal of venture capitalists to build enthusiasm and excitement about a product that doesn't exist yet so they can get enough money to make it exist. And so much of health AI is in that space where they're making promises about these things that maybe doesn't even have a line of computer code yet so that they can get $1 billion of angel investor funding so that they can hopefully make it. So much of it right now, a lot of the enthusiasm is for highly personalized medicine. So this idea that you can have an app on your phone that's connected to, biomonitoring of you that's going to monitor your health every day. And that it is going to give you like real-time suggestions for how you should improve your health. One of the most shocking ones to me is there's a health app that's ostensibly AI-driven that is supposed to help you calibrate exactly what vitamins you should take.
Wow.
And so you've got an in-home like urinalysis test. You're supposed to pee in a cup several times a day, run it through your phone, and then it's supposed to tell you what to take so that you can optimize your health.
Wow, so this is all like preventative care almost, like for this particular example.
So a lot of the venture capital investment right now is around preventative care, whole health, 360, 24/7 monitoring. Honestly, that's the most vapor-ish of it, right? What do you
mean by vapor?
Yeah, so that's the technology that doesn't really exist and doesn't really exist well yet.
Gotcha.
There's a bunch of AI development going on in hospital systems in more traditional clinical context. And that stuff, while some of it is hyped and overinflated, that stuff is much closer to production ready. Some of it is working very well. Radiologists in particular have been at the leading edge of health AI for a long time. So they're developing these new technologies that can read brain scans, PET scans, things like that, which are incredibly complicated data presentations that are hard even for trained radiologists to interpret correctly. And so AI can assist radiologists in correctly diagnosing somebody on the basis of some of these scans.
This makes me think like WebMD has gotten just bigger. Like the problem of WebMD, at least from my lay perspective, is that people diagnosing themselves, going to the doctor, telling them what they have, which is good for self-advocacy and that sort of thing. But this sounds like it potentially could get much bigger and much more intensive.
Yeah, I think the whole health monitoring is going to lead to that. And, it kind of cuts out any moment where you scrutinize what WebMD is telling you and evaluate it for yourself. I think it's going to short circuit that.
Yeah.
And so it'll be like, my phone tells me I have cancer.
Right.
And so can you fix my cancer, doctor? Right. Like at least with WebMD, right, it gives an analysis of what the signs and symptoms are. If you're a reasonably savvy consumer of health information, you can compare what those signs and symptoms are to what you're experiencing and, only go into the doctor to ask more if it reaches a certain level of confidence that, oh, maybe I really do have that. But one of the big problems with AI is there's so many variables, you can't actually explain all of the decisions that are being made in any given case. And so I really do think a lot of these phone alerts are just going to be like, beep, you have cancer. Right? With no scrutability. And then you go to the doctor and say, my phone says I have cancer. What do I do?
It kind of reminds me of the situation in COVID where lots of people were saying, oh, no, I've done my own research. I don't need the vaccine because I found something online that's going to be fine. I mean, it sounds like that, but times 1,000.
Yeah, in a way. And especially, again, because there's no opportunity for any kind of critical literacy. It's just the phone beeps and it says you have a thing. And to the extent that you can trust the manufacturers of the apps behind it, then that's useful information. But if it's unclear what the backing of that is, it's a dangerous situation.
What would you say to someone like me who's not an expert in medicine, obviously, and things come up from time to time? How can I sort of sift through what's hype, what's not? What of these kind of apps and things are actually legit?
So this is incredibly difficult. Honestly, it requires a pretty high degree of both health and AI literacy to separate the things that are working from the things that aren't working. And so I wish I could tell you that there was a couple of simple steps that you could engage in to sort of separate that. Honestly, what I think we really need is a little bit more regulatory teeth in this space, right? We need the FDA evaluating these technologies at least as rigorously as they're evaluating drug products, right? In the same way, you go to the doctor and the doctor prescribes amoxicillin, right, an antibiotic, you're not going to say, oh, I think I should have erythromycin instead based on my research, right? That's not a level that most of us can engage in at the doctor. And so the same way, should I use this AI or that AI? Really, we need rigorous clinical research and government regulation to help us identify between these complex options, what are the ones that are really reliable, valid, and have a real positive impact on health.
If I go to see my doctor today for an exam or for a routine test or I'm going in for some operation, or what are some examples of kind of the ways that AI might actually be currently being used that I might not even be aware of?
It is really interesting. Most of it that's being used right now, you're not aware of. So you have that experience of going into the doctor. Most of us do, I think. And the doctors don't talk to us very much anymore. They talk to their computer and type furiously, sort of transcribing.
I always want to know what's they're typing in there.
Yeah.
Right?
Like, this guy's an idiot.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, yeah. This guy doesn't know anything. No,
that's for sure me. I'm sure they have that there.
There are a whole bunch of different models and algorithms and AI systems running behind the scenes in a lot of these cases where it's looking looking at all of your chart history, all the things the doctors documented at you previously. It's also looking at the check boxes they're ticking right now and the things they're typing right now in order to make recommendations to the doctor that might help guide them to a diagnosis. So that's some of the things that's most common right now. And it's really hard to know when it's being used and when it isn't. I saw a survey not too long ago of physicians where it was asking them, do you feel a particular need to disclose to your patients that AI is being used as part of the clinical encounter? And the overwhelming majority were no, right? Like that's not the level of information they feel they should share with patients. And it's not terribly different from other technology. A majority of physicians report using Wikipedia to learn a little bit more about a condition before rendering a diagnosis, and they also don't feel an obligation to tell you that they did that either.
Now, this might be going outside of the medical practice a little bit, maybe not, is the sort of experimental use of AI in healthcare, especially in mental health care. Mm-hmm. There's been a couple of instances in which people have used, let's say, an AI chatbot to converse with patients who are seeking healthcare in some sort of digital space, right? Is that fall into the same kind of thing? Like they don't feel compelled to have to reveal that, or?
Yeah, it's hard, right? And I think so. So there is an increasing number of experiments where they are using AI chatbots in the place of mental health care providers or physical health care providers. Mm-hmm. And they're doing experiments to see what the patient experience is of that alternative form. And there was one experiment they did that was kind of unethical. There was really no informed consent or disclosure process. And it's an interesting result that it's kind of hard to know how to take it. On the one hand, before it was disclosed to patients that they were speaking with a robot, they were reporting a fairly positive healthcare experience. But once it was disclosed to them, all of that went away. One thing that's so important about therapy in a mental health care context is knowing that somebody's listening to you.
Right.
And they come in later and say, oh, it's just a robot, right? That's very frustrating. But at the same time, there's some other studies, we increasingly use patient portals to communicate with our doctors. So you can kind of text message them through your patient portal.
Right.
And they have AI systems in some of them that they're testing that recommend to the doctor what they might say, and then the doctor can approve or reject the recommendation of the robot.
Wow.
And patients reliably report that the robot is more empathetic than their doctor, right? Seems to care more about them than their doctor.
Wow.
And that improves their experience in healthcare because we all want to think that our doctor cares about us, but they're mostly so overworked that they don't have the bandwidth, even if they do care about us, to do that kind of emotional labor for us.
That seems to say less about the AI than it does about the doctors. Like, what's wrong about our system that our doctors don't seem empathetic?
Yeah,
right.
I mean, they seem like they're overwhelmed, right? Just as much as everybody else.
And I think that's a really good point. So despite all the rhetoric of health AI as being an intervention that will make healthcare better, more accurate, less expensive, a lot of the use cases that are getting rolled out most quickly are about paving over the gaps in the system, right? It's about places where healthcare is not working as well as it should right now and using an AI to support that, right? So we lost a lot of healthcare providers during COVID, to COVID itself, and to subsequent burnout and early retirements. And it takes a long time to train and staff health professional positions, right? There's a lot of education that's required. And so we're running a shortage of doctors and nurses and other healthcare providers all over the country. You can roll out an AI that works kind of okay, much faster than you can roll out a good doctor. And so we're using AI to fill the gaps a lot right now.
It seems like there's a sort of qualitative shift in the ability to have this much data involved with health. Do you foresee anything good or bad or anything from having this amassed amount of data?
Yeah, I would say both to a certain extent, right? So on the one hand, this is a lot of the way that health AI technologies get sold is they can look at more data at any given time than a human doctor can. Right? You can just onboard information from your entire history, from your entire chart, et cetera, and try to make a recommendation, hopefully that's personalized to you or specific variables about you and yourself and your health. And that's exciting in some ways, but the reality doesn't always match up. So the algorithms that support AI are really good at finding shortcuts. So you may give them all this information, but they're able to discern quite quickly what are the variables that have been historically most predictive about a particular healthcare situation, for example. And so There's a lot of issues with health inequity in this country, right? So people who live in wealthy areas versus people who live in unwealthy areas tend to have better health overall. And we have histories of racial segregation that follows those same sorts of lines. And so a lot of these AI systems tend to make predictions about race, or even if you hide race-based data from the AI system, it will make predictions based on zip codes, which can be a proxy for ethnicity really quickly, right? Because of the history of segregation in this country. And what happens as a result of that is it turns out most of the analyses suggest that what the AI is finding is not something that's biological. It's not about race-based differences between different ethnicities. It's a fact that you can use health to measure the effects of racism. Right. So you see this long-term marginalization of some population just shows up in people's health, and AI makes shortcuts about that and makes recommendations based on the problematic history of healthcare in this country. And that's a dangerous situation, to be sure.
Yeah. The way I understand medicine, I mean, it's the same thing as law and maybe even teaching, is that it's a kind of a practice. We talk about medical practice, law practices, that sort of thing. Does AI pose a sort of threat to the practice of medicine as such? That is, the need to see many cases, the need to learn through repetition in a way of seeing the same kind of people over and over and over again. Does AI look to shortcut that practice process?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think that's something that we need to study in more detail to really understand. So one thing I'll say is that, one recurrent issue in health and medicine we talk about is the problem of zebras, right? So in medicine, basically, especially if you're in like in a primary care clinic, family practice, you see the same basic cold, flu, strep over and over and over again.
Right.
And when something weird and different comes in that you don't normally see, you might just diagnose it as cold, flu, or strep. They talk about that as the zebra problem.
Okay.
And so the zebra problem is if you look at horses all day and all of a sudden you see a zebra, you might ask, what kind of horse is that?
Right.
And so this is an issue of trying to diagnose rare conditions or rarely diagnosed conditions.
Because that involves a kind of algorithmic process as well, right? Seeing the same symptoms, you just check the boxes and here's what it is, right?
Right. And so there is a potential, I think, for AI. So practice and repetition are important to become a good doctor, but they can also lead you down the pathway of just recycling common diagnoses, even when that might not be the most appropriate option. So I think AI might help short circuit that a little bit. But another thing I wanted to talk about in reference to your question that I think is really critical here is one of the things that doctors are most excited about when it comes to AI is escaping the paperwork burden.
Oh, okay.
So doctors spend lots of time talking about how much they hate having to type into charts, having to fill out your information. They talk scornfully about quote unquote pajama time.
Okay.
Pajama time is the time when they're supposed to be done with work, but they're frantically catching up on documenting all the patient appointments that they saw. And so AI looks super exciting because you can basically have a medical Alexa or a medical Siri in the office with you that will capture everything that gets said in the meeting and then distill it down, summarize it to a distinct clinical note, and your documentation's done and you can actually enjoy your family time later during the day. That sounds awesome. I totally understand why, not all that dissimilar sometimes from grading.
Yeah.
Right. Sometimes you don't want to grade at the end of the day after you've been teaching and doing your other appointments all day. That said, there's also really good evidence to suggest that the process of writing up your clinical notes is essential to thinking about your diagnosis.
Right.
Your brain, in the act of writing, has to take in all that information, distill it down to a meaningful note, synthesize, harmonize that data, and that many doctors actually change their diagnosis to something more correct when they move from the initial clinical encounter to later the process of summarizing and writing it up.
So an AI might speed that process up, which would take away the process of decision.
Right. So if AI takes the summary task out of the doctor's hands entirely, then they miss a critical opportunity to think about diagnoses. Their work-life balance is better, and hard to argue that they shouldn't have that. But on the other hand, if they end up being less thoughtful in their diagnoses because they're not doing the thing that they admittedly hated but was helping them think, that's not a good outcome for healthcare.
So we've talked about some of the potential downsides, but I'm kind of curious if we can put on our rose-tinted glasses for a minute. So if we get everything right, what are some of the potential benefits of AI in healthcare?
The work in radiology that I mentioned earlier is super exciting. We often think of a radiograph, like a PET scan or an MRI scan, as a picture. It's not a picture. It's a very complicated data display. It's 4 dimensions of data compressed into a 2-dimensional representational space. That's a lot of information, and even highly trained individuals have trouble processing it. So if AI can assist radiologists to get to the accurate diagnosis quicker, that's exciting for me. The other thing that's exciting for me is we've kind of under-resourced a lot of public health in this country. And so using AI to help with that, I think, can be really important. So let me put a little traction on that. So I work occasionally with Dr. Casey Claiborne, who's the head of the Addiction Research Institute, the Steve Hicks School of Social Work on campus here. And we've been working on trying to develop an AI system that monitors like paramedic EMS records for records that may be related to opioid overdose events, right? So EMS professionals, unlike doctors, don't have diagnostic codes, right? They don't enter a specific value that says this is what the patient has. They write it up in a narrative.
Right.
And so it takes a long time for humans to read that narrative, process that information.
Even if they do, yeah.
Even if they do, right? So an AI can look through these, fairly reliably identify opioid overdose events. And the long-term goal of this is to use it to better support public health intervention. So if we know that there are certain hotspots in Austin, for example, we might be able to deploy more ambulances to that area. We might be able to send community health workers to that area to pass out Narcan, for example. All of these things can enable more real-time public health response to things like the opioid epidemic. And so these kind of public health domains, when structured well, I'm really excited about the way that they might help us react faster and more preventatively.
You've recently written a book, The Doctor and the Algorithm, Promise, Peril, and the Future of Health AI. You had to give us a quick blurb about your own book. What would people find there, and why should people read it?
Yeah, so I refer to myself in the opening pages of the book as AI cautiously optimistic. And so we live in an environment around a lot of things, but around AI that's very polarized. There are people who are just incredibly enthusiastic about AI and it's going to change the future of everything for the better. And there are people that think that AI is Satan itself. There's not a lot of middle ground in that conversation right now. And so if you're looking for middle ground, this is the book for middle ground, right? I talk about some of the things where I think AI really can improve health and medicine, and where if we can anchor AI development in health and medicine on the right kind of health research with a good social science background and not just venture capitalism, we can see these really great improvements. At the same time, I talk a little bit about some of the overly promissory rhetoric for the things that just don't exist yet. So if you're looking for that middle of the road take on really, as the subtitle suggests, the promise and the peril,
right,
that's what's in that book.
Excellent. Scott, thanks so much for joining us today. Really enjoyed it.
Yes, thank you, Scott.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was a good conversation.
That's our show. Next time on AI for the Rest of Us.
Fundamentally, the concern is what kind of society do we become once we start surrendering more and more authority to machines to make what have historically been human-driven and human-based decisions?
AI for the Rest of Us is a production of the University of Texas at Austin's College of Natural Sciences and College of Liberal Arts. Our show is part of the university's Year of AI. To learn more, visit yearofai.utexas.edu.
For links and more resources on today's topic, go to aifortherest.net.
Big thanks today to our guest, Scott Graham. Our executive producers are Christine Sinatra and Dan Oppenheimer. Sound design and audio editing by Robert Scaramuccia. Our theme music is by Aiolos Rue. Our interviews are recorded by the fabulous audio engineers at the Liberal Arts ITS Recording Studio.
Thanks for listening.